Hello, and now we will try to demonstrate on how to use the reactive forms here in Angular. So first of all, we need to import the reactive forms module in our app.module.ts, and then you also need to add it in our imports array. And then after you've added it, after you imported it, let's proceed to our app.component.html. I'm still basically using the same project, so what I'm going to do is I'm just gonna remove the form in here in our project, save it, and change this title into um, let's say reactive forms. And then here, let's change this to validation with reactive forms module. Then after saving it, um, we're gonna create a form tag in here again, form, and then I'm gonna use a property binding for this. So form group is equivalent to my form, and then we'll have a method or submit method and use a ng directive called ng submit. Just basically used for submitting in a forms tag here in Angular. So on submit, and then I will save it. And then as you can see, I received an error. So I'm gonna create here. So here I'm just gonna remove this, and I'm gonna create a new variable called my form, then type of any. Okay, and then create a constructor and inject the form builder, form builder. As you can see, I already imported the form builder, and then afterwards on that, I'm gonna create a ng on init, and then I will create a method that will create my forms. So this dot my form is equivalent to this dot form builder dot group, and then I'll create a array that will basically hold name, and it's gonna have a initially null value, but we'll use the validators in here. So basically this import is for the validators in Angular, so we're gonna put validators that required, and the name the name variable now is now required for our HTML or for the user input. And then next is email. And then we're gonna add validators again, dot required, then add more validators dot email. So basically this validators that emails validates if the user input for the email is actually an email address that contains a at Gmail, like at Yahoo, at Hotmail. Then if it contains a string like that, it will basically allow the user to proceed on to the next creation or to the next step in doing or creating an account. Then afterwards, we're gonna create a message variable in here. Then it's initially gonna be blank and validators dot required. Okay, and then after that, we're gonna create a method for the on submit. So here in our app.component.ts, we're gonna create a on submit method that will just display the data or the data of our myform variable in the console.log. So let's save this, and then let's go back to our HTML file and finish the form. So next is we're gonna create a label for name. This is basically for the input name, and then input with a class of form control, and then type of text and ID of name, and form control name is equivalent to name. Save it, and then let's create one more label for email, and the label is gonna be email, and then we're gonna create another input field with a class of form control and type of text with an ID of email. And then it's gonna have a form control um, name that will basically handle the forms with reference to the email. And then we're just gonna create another field for message. This is the label for the message, and message, and another input tag with a class of form control, and then with a ID of message, and the form control, name it on it again. It's just gonna be message so that it's not confusing. And then, oh, this is not input, by the way. Should be text area because it's just a message. Okay. And then we're just gonna close it. Text area. Okay. Now it's closed. Then save it. Okay. And then after the text area field, we're gonna create here a button with a class of button dash primary, and then with a type of submit, and this is disabled if my form dot is invalid, and it has a click event or click function of the method on submit, and then it's going to be labeled submit. Okay, my form dot invalid is experiencing some errors. It's not a known property and a button, so I'm experiencing an error in here, and as you can see, I may have did a misspelling on that one. It's basically disabled, and then I will save it. Okay, then now our HTML file is basically finished, and going back to our app.component.ts, we can basically see that we use the form builder, the form group, and the validators as our imports um, for the validators, and on how to build our forms here in Angular. So basically, the form builder will create a form that contains name, that contains email, that contains message. So basically, this is what we will display later in our button in here. If we click this button with a on submit, it's gonna basically display it on our console, the value of the variable myForm that we created, which will basically contain name, email, and message. This is basically used in order that we don't have to use a property binding in here, because we don't need to hard code it because the form builder is already doing that for us. And as you can see, there is no ng model or or anything that may bind our property, yet it is existing in our form group that that this inputs will be stored in our form, which is called my form. So going back to our app.component.ts, after creating the form and the data on our form, we will put some validators. So basically, the validators is a module here in Angular, or maybe you can call it a library. So basically, the validators has a method which is going to be required and etc. And maybe this could be email, this could be a password, and etc. So basically, this is just basically what we did earlier using the directives on our template driven. We hard coded a required function on our HTML file or on our HTML tag, but now it's much more presentable to look at if there is no hard code in our HTML, wherein it only exists on our TypeScript file. And it is special in a way that these validators can detect if you are really inputting a data that's an email or whatever kind of data that is required for the forms. Then, if we type in, for example, John Doe, and email is johndoe at example.com, and hello everyone. Basically, the submit button is now not disabled, wherein in our HTML file, you can see a property in here which is disabled if our form is still invalid. Our form is going to be invalid if some fields are not containing a data. So wherein in this case, for example, the email is not existing. So basically the submit button is still disabled. As you can see, it's kind of grayish and not fully blue. But if we input some random words in here, it's still gonna be disabled because the fact that we use validators.email, this basically um, really checks if the user is entering a valid email. And as you can see, it requires a at symbol. So if we put at example.com, okay, and then oh, I accidentally save it. So let's say try it again, John Doe, and then John Doe at example.com, and then hello everyone. Okay, so now you can see that the submit button is now fully functioning because our forms now is valid, and that's the power of using a reactive forms module here in Angular, which is basically much more flexible and much more complex to use, and it has a lot of purpose that will help you in creating your projects in the future. That will be all for our reactive forms. Thank you and see you in the next video.